The hardest part of tuning a piano is not fixing the note that's wrong. It's that most of the time, I am the only person in the room who can hear that it's wrong at all. I've spent 30 years training my ear to catch the thing nobody else catches. The single string that's drifted a hair flat, the beat you feel more than hear, the wrongness humming underneath a chord that sounds perfectly fine to everyone else in the parlor. A family will sit around a piano at Christmas, singing along, delighted, and I'll be standing in the doorway, wincing, because to me, the whole instrument is crying out that something is off. And here is the strange, lonely truth of my trade, the one that turned out to be the truth of my whole life. When you can hear something no one else can hear, and you say so, you don't sound like an expert. You sound like you're imagining things, being right, all by yourself, about a thing nobody else can perceive, is one of the fastest ways I know to be called crazy. My name is Delphine. I'm 53, and I tune pianos in a damp green town along a river in Louisiana, where the heat and the wet go to work on every instrument in the parish and keep me in business, and where I've spent my life listening for the note that's gone wrong. I'm going to tell you about my brother-in-law, and about the years my family spent convincing me that the only broken thing in the room was me, and about what happened when I finally stopped arguing and let the sour note ring out on its own, loud enough, at last, for everyone. Before I go on, let me ask you something and let it sit. Have you ever been the only one who could tell that something was wrong? Some note under the surface that nobody else would admit they heard, and had the people around you decide, so gently, so reasonably, so many times, that the real problem must be you? If you know that particular madness, the madness of being right in a room that has agreed you are not well, then stay close, because this story is yours. Let me tell you who I was before any of this, because it matters that I was not always the family's cautionary tale. I learned to tune from an old blind man named Mr. Préjean when I was a girl, because I had the ear for it, and he told me once that a good tuner is really just a person who refuses to lie about what she hears, and I have tried to be that my whole life. I married a music teacher, a gentle, patient man named Sam, and we had 30 good years and no children, just each other and a house full of instruments. And when he died of a slow illness, I grieved him the honest way, and I did not fall apart, whatever Beau would later suggest. And I had Colette, my little sister, 7 years younger, who I'd half raised because our mother worked, who used to sit under my piano while I practiced and fall asleep to the vibrations in the floor. Colette and I were close, the way sisters are when one of them was almost a mother. She called me every single day of her adult life. I tell you this so you understand what I lost, and how strange it is to lose a sister not to death, but to a slow, careful campaign, and to be told the whole time that you're the one who's unwell for grieving her while she's still alive. I need to tell you about Beau, and I need to be fair, because the whole trap of a man like Beau is that the fair description of him and the true description of him are two different things, and it takes years to learn to hold both. My younger sister, Colette, met him at a time in her life when she was lonely and a little lost, and Beau came into that opening like sunshine. He was charming in a way that is hard to describe to someone who wasn't there for it, warm and attentive and funny, the kind of man who remembers the name of your dog and asks about your mother's hip and makes you feel, when he's talking to you, like you're the only person who has ever mattered. My whole family fell for him at once, the way you'd fall for a warm day in February. My parents adored him. Colette bloomed. And I liked him too, at first. I want that on the record. I was not born suspicious of my sister's husband. I liked him, until the day my ear caught the first wrong note. And after that, I could never unhear it. It was a small thing, the first note. It always is. We were all at dinner, and Beau was telling a story about his past, about the college he'd gone to, and a professor he'd had. And I happened to know a little about that place, because my late husband had taught near there. And something in Beau's story didn't sit right. A detail that was off by a hair, the way a string can be off by a hair. It wasn't a lie I could prove, it was just a wrongness I could hear. And I watched Beau's face, for just a second, when he thought no one was looking, rearrange itself from the warm storyteller into something flat and calculating and cold, and then rearrange back, so fast that if you weren't trained to catch the thing nobody catches, you'd never have seen it. But I saw it. I heard the beat under the chord, and a coldness went through me, because I understood, all at once, that the sunshine was a performance, and that I might be the only person at that table who could tell. I wish I could tell you I handled it wisely. I didn't, because I didn't yet understand what I was dealing with. I did what an honest person does. I started, gently, to raise questions. Just small ones, at first. I'd noticed that Beau's stories about his finances didn't add up, that the successful business he described never seemed to have an actual office, that the money he spent so freely and generously on my family had no visible source. I noticed that he'd begun, very sweetly, to involve himself in my parents' money, offering to help manage their little nest egg to get them better returns, and that my father, dazzled, had started signing things. I noticed that Colette, who used to call me every day, called less and less, and that when she did, she had a new way of talking, a careful way, as though someone were listening. I heard the whole instrument of my family going slowly out of tune, one string at a time, and I did the thing I am built to do. I said, I think something is wrong here, and I want to be clear about something, because this is where people always assume I must have been imagining it. I checked. I did not go around accusing on a feeling. I am a careful woman. I have to be, to do what I do. So quietly, on my own, I checked the things that could be checked. The prestigious firm Beau said he'd worked for in Houston had never heard of him. The impressive-sounding fund he managed had no registration I could find anywhere it should have been registered. The alma mater he spoke of so warmly had no record of the years he claimed. Every single string I plucked came back sour. I was not hearing ghosts. I had, in a folder in my drawer, the beginnings of the plain, flat truth. But that is the thing about a machine like the one Beau had built around me. By then, it no longer mattered what I could prove, because the proving itself had been turned into the symptom. A folder of evidence wasn't evidence anymore. It was just more of poor Delphine's obsession. Look how she's built a whole file on the man who married her sister. Isn't that sad? Isn't that a little frightening? The truer my folder got, the crazier it made me look. And Beau knew that. And that is exactly why he never once had to argue with a single fact in it. And that is when I learned what a man like Beau does to the person who can hear him. He did not argue with me. That was the genius of it. And I didn't understand for years how thoroughly I was being handled. He never once fought me directly. Instead, he got sad. He got concerned. He would tell Colette, gently, that he was worried about me, that he'd noticed I seemed tense, unhappy, maybe a little lonely since my husband passed, that it broke his heart to see me so suspicious of everyone, so unable to just be happy for my sister. He reframed my accurate perception as a symptom. My hearing the wrong note became evidence, not that there was a wrong note, but that there was something wrong with my hearing. And because he was so warm about it, so reluctant, so obviously pained to even bring it up, it landed on my family not as an attack on me, but as loving concern. Poor Delphine. She's been through so much. She's not herself. You have to understand how a thing like that works, because it is the cruelest machine I know of. Every single thing I did to prove I was sane became proof that I wasn't. If I stayed calm and laid out my concerns clearly, that was chilling, wasn't it? How coldly obsessed she was. If I got upset that no one believed me, well, look at her. Look how agitated she gets. This isn't healthy. If I brought evidence, I was paranoid and building a case against a man whose only crime was loving my sister. If I backed off, I was sullen and clearly still stewing. The one thing that had actually happened, that I had heard a true wrong note in Beau, became the one explanation no one was allowed to consider, because considering it meant admitting that the sunshine they all adored was a fraud, and it was so much easier, so much more comfortable to decide that the problem was the strange, sad, tense widow with her wild ideas. The worst of it, the part that hollowed me out, was watching it work on Colette. My sister, who had called me every day, started calling once a week, then once a month. And there was always a reason. They were so busy. Beau needed her, and I could hear in her voice that she'd been coached, that my name had become a thing said carefully in her house. Once, early on, before she'd fully turned, she called me crying and said Beau had told her he was frightened of me, that he thought I might do something, that she should be careful about leaving me alone with the children they were talking about having. Frightened of me. I have never raised my voice or my hand to a living soul, and this man had planted in my own sister the idea that I was dangerous, and he had done it so gently, so worriedly, that Colette repeated it to me as a kindness, as a warning, as though she were doing me a favor by telling me how I was seen. And I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, understanding that I was being erased in real time, painted over stroke by stroke, and that the more I protested the portrait, the more the portrait seemed accurate. There is a specific despair in feeling yourself become, in the minds of the people you love, a person you have never been, and being unable to do a single thing about it that doesn't make the painting look more true. And here is the part I am almost ashamed to tell you, except that I think it's the most important part, the part somebody out there needs to hear. It worked on me too. That's what nobody warns you about. When enough people who love you tell you, gently, patiently, for long enough, that you are not seeing clearly, that you are not well, that your perceptions can't be trusted, you begin to wonder if they're right. I lay awake at night and I interrogated my own mind. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I was lonely and bitter since I'd lost my husband and I couldn't stand my sister's happiness. Maybe I was hearing wrong notes that weren't there, the way an ear can start to ring in silence. I, who had trusted my own hearing for 30 years, who made my entire living being right about sounds no one else could catch, began to doubt the one instrument I had never once had reason to doubt, which was myself. That is what the machine is for. It is not built to win the argument. It is built to make you stop trusting the ear that heard the truth. I want to tell you about the lowest point. The winter I nearly handed them the verdict they wanted, because the people who tell these stories always skip past how close you come to agreeing that you're the broken one. Colette had a birthday, and I went, and I tried so hard to be light and easy and to show them all that I was fine, that I wasn't the tense, suspicious creature Beau had so lovingly described. And at that party, my own mother took me aside, with tears in her eyes, and told me that the family had been talking, and that they thought I should see someone, that they were worried, that Beau had even kindly offered to help pay for it. Beau had offered to pay for my treatment. The man I could hear was a fraud, had gotten my own family to bring me, gently, an invitation to be medicated for the crime of hearing him. And I drove home from that party, and I sat in my car in my driveway in the dark, and I thought, maybe I should just take it. Maybe I should agree that I'm not well, and take whatever they want to give me. And stop hearing the note, because being the only one who hears it has cost me my family, my sister, my own certainty about my own mind. And I am so tired. And maybe a person who has lost this much really is the crazy one. I sat there a long time. And then I did the thing that saved me, and it had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. I went inside, and I sat down at my own piano, the one my husband bought me, and I played a chord, and I heard, clear as day, that the F above middle C was flat. Just slightly, a hair. Nobody else who walked into that room would have heard it. And I sat there with my hands on the keys, and I thought, I can hear that. I can still hear that. There is nothing wrong with my ear. There never was. My whole life, my gift and my curse both, has been that I hear the true note under the pretty chord. And I am not going to let a frightened family and a smiling liar convince me to break my own ears so that everyone else can be comfortable. I am not crazy. I am early. Those are not the same thing, and I had almost let them persuade me they were. There's a thing that happens when you tune that I thought about a lot in those days. When a string is just barely off, you don't hear two separate notes. You hear one note with a wobble in it, a beating, a wah 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 underneath, that tells your ear something is wrong, even though you can't quite name it. Most people feel that beating without knowing what it is. It just makes the music feel faintly unsettled, and they can't say why, so they decide it's fine. My whole gift is that I can name the beating. I can tell you exactly which string is lying, and my family, all of them, had been feeling the beating under Beau for years. The faint wrongness, the too good, the money from nowhere. And rather than name it, they had done what untrained ears do. They'd decided the discomfort must be coming from somewhere else. From me. I was the wobble they could point at, so they wouldn't have to hear the one they couldn't stand to name. That is not stupidity. It is what ears do when the truth is too expensive. And knowing that didn't make me less alone, but it did make me stop believing I was the broken string. But here is what else I understood, sitting at that piano. And it was the thing that changed everything. I had been fighting the wrong battle. I had spent years trying to make them hear the note. And you cannot make someone hear a note they have decided not to hear, especially when hearing it would cost them their comfortable, warm February day. I was never going to win that fight, and it was destroying me. And the destruction was the whole point. So I decided to stop, not to give in, not to agree I was unwell, but to stop trying to convince them. I would trust my own ear, privately, completely, and I would stop setting myself on fire to prove to people what they had chosen not to see. I would step back, and I would protect my own mind, and I would let the instrument play on without me standing in the doorway wincing. What I did not fully realize, though some part of me suspected it, was that I had been the only thing keeping the whole thing in tune enough to hold together. I was the only one watching Beau closely. I was the only friction in his smooth machine. The only person whose eyes made him careful. And when I stepped back, when I stopped watching and warning and being the family problem, Beau, for the first time in years, had no one paying real attention. And a man like that, unwatched, does not become honest. He becomes bold. I heard about it in pieces over the following year from the edges of a family that had mostly stopped talking to me. Beau, emboldened, having successfully neutralized the one person who ever questioned him, expanded. He wasn't content anymore with my parents' little nest egg. He started taking money from people outside the family, friends, neighbors, members of the church. He was running an investment thing, promising returns that a trained ear would have known were impossible. And he was so charming, and he had my whole respectable family standing behind him as unwitting references. And people trusted him, and they gave him their savings. He got greedy, the way the unwatched always do, and he got sloppy, and he took in more and more, faster and faster. And the thing about a scheme like that is that it is a chord that cannot resolve. It can only get louder until it breaks. And it broke without me. That's the part I need you to hear, because I think it matters. I didn't expose him. I didn't build the case my family had accused me of building. I had stepped back entirely, protecting my own peace. What happened was that Beau, greedy and unwatched, took the savings of a man from 2 towns over who was not family, who did not love him, who could not be made to feel that his own perceptions were a symptom. And when the promised returns didn't come, that man did not go to therapy. That man went to the state, and to a lawyer, and to the authorities, and there was an investigation. And the investigation did what an investigation does. It looked at the cold numbers, the bank records, the paper, the money that came in and went nowhere it was supposed to go. And the paper told the whole truth all by itself, in a language that could not be reframed as the paranoid imaginings of a sad widow. The note I had heard years before, alone, at a dinner table, and been called crazy for hearing, finally rang out so loud that the entire parish heard it at once. Beau was arrested. The charming February day was over. It came apart fast, the way these things do once the first crack shows. The man from 2 towns over was only the beginning. Once there was an investigation, and it made the local paper, the other people came forward, one after another. The neighbors and the church friends, and the man who'd remortgaged to give Beau his savings. All of them realizing at once that the returns they'd been bragging about had been paid, when they were paid at all, out of the next person's money. It was the oldest chord in the world, and it broke the oldest way. And my family, my parents especially, had to sit in a church basement full of ruined neighbors and understand that they had been the respectable faces that made it all possible, that Beau had used their good name and their evident love for him as the reference that convinced decent people to hand over their savings. They had vouched for him with their whole reputation. They had helped him do it without knowing. and they would carry that. And every single one of them sitting in that basement had to remember that there had been one person for years standing in the doorway, wincing, saying she could hear something wrong, and that they had decided that person needed medicine. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt something quieter and heavier than that, because the wreckage was real. My parents lost most of their nest egg. Neighbors and church friends lost savings they would never get back. And my sister Colette, my little sister who had bloomed in the sunshine and then spent years being slowly turned against me, found out all at once that the life she'd been living was built on a fraud, that the man she'd defended against her own sister was exactly what that sister had tried to tell her he was. There is no triumph in that. There is only the terrible vindication of watching a thing you begged everyone to prevent finally happen because they wouldn't listen. Bo, from the middle of the collapse, did the one thing I did expect. He came to me because in his mind, in the mind of a man like that, someone must have finally gotten me. Someone must have finally exposed him. And of course it was Delphine, the one who'd always been on to him. He came to my workshop where I was tuning a piano, and he was not charming anymore. The mask was off entirely now, and he was cold and furious, and he demanded to know how I'd done it, how I'd finally brought him down. And I set down my tuning lever, and I looked at my brother-in-law, and I told him the truth. I said, "Bo, I didn't do anything. I stopped watching you, that's all. I stepped back and let you be exactly what you are, and what you are did the rest. You didn't get caught because I finally convinced someone. You got caught because you took money from a man who wasn't family and couldn't be talked out of his own ears. I heard the wrong note in you 5 years ago. I just finally stopped being the only thing standing between you and the wall you were always going to hit. And I watched that land on him, watched him understand that his own greed, unchecked, had done what I never could, and there was nothing charming left in his face at all. Just the flat, cold, calculating thing I'd glimpsed for 1 second across a dinner table years before, finally showing in full. And do you know what I felt, looking at the real face of the man who had cost me years of my life, and my own sister, and very nearly my grip on my own mind? Relief. Not triumph, relief. Because for years I had been the only person alive who had ever seen that face. 1 second of it, long ago, and had been told I'd imagined it, until I half wondered if I had. And now, here it was, out in the open, in my own workshop, undeniable, exactly as I'd always known it to be. I had not imagined him. I had seen him true, the very first time, with my own good ear. He stood there, wanting me to have been his downfall, because even in ruin, a man like that needs to be the center of the story, needs an enemy clever enough to explain how someone so brilliant got caught. And I would not give him even that. I said, "You did this, all of it. I just stopped being the thing that kept you careful." And I picked my tuning lever back up, and I turned back to the piano I'd been working on. And after a moment, I heard him leave, and I did not watch him go. I had a note to bring back into tune, and it needed my whole attention, and he was already, to me, just a chord that had finished breaking. Here is what it cost him, and it was everything, and every bit of it was his own. Beau went to prison. Not for long enough, they never do, but he went. And he lost the whole beautiful life he'd conned his way into, the adoring family, the respectable name, the warm February day he'd been living inside for years. He lost Colette, who divorced him. He lost the one thing a man like that lives on, which is the belief of the people around him. And he lost it permanently and publicly and by his own hand, because in the end, no charm survives a paper trail. He had spent years making one clear-eyed woman look crazy so he could keep the room believing his beautiful cord. And the moment that woman stepped out of the room, the cord broke on its own, because it had always been broken, and I had only ever been the one who could hear it. And my sister came back to me. That's the part I hold on to, more than the justice. Colette came to my workshop months after the arrest, and she stood in the doorway among all my pianos, and she could barely look at me. And she said, "You tried to tell me. You tried to tell me for years, and I let him convince me you were sick." And she broke down. And I crossed that room, and I held my little sister while she cried, because the thing about being right is that it gives you no pleasure at all. When being right meant watching someone you love get destroyed, I didn't say I told you so. What would have been the point? I just held her, and I told her the truest thing I knew, which was that it was not her fault, that she had been played by a professional, that the shame belonged to him and not to her. We are rebuilding it now, slowly, string by string, the way you bring an instrument that's been let go for years back into tune, one careful turn at a time. She comes to the workshop on Sundays now. She sits under one of the pianos while I work, the way she did when we were girls. And some of the ease has come back, though not all of it, because you don't get back the years the smiling man stole, any more than you get back a string that's finally snapped. But she's learning to trust her own ears again too, which is the thing he really took from her, more than the money. For years, Beau had been her tuning fork, the one who told her what was true, and she'd stopped checking anything against her own hearing. Now she catches herself, she told me, pausing before she believes a too smooth story, listening for the beating underneath. And I think that is the one good thing that came out of all of it, that my sister learned, late and hard, to hear for herself. I would rather she had never needed to learn it. But there is no small pride in watching her tune her own life now, carefully, by her own ear, checking the note before she trusts the chord. I did have to make my peace with the family that had called me unwell. And I want to be honest that it is a peace with a hard edge on it. My parents apologized, in their way, shattered by what they'd lost and by what they'd let be done to me. And I have forgiven them, because they were conned too. And grief and fear make people cowards. But I have not pretended it didn't happen. I do not let anyone in my family tell the story as though it were nobody's fault, as though poor Beau fooled us all equally. Because he did not fool me. I heard him. And I was made to pay for hearing him, with years of my life and my own peace of mind. And I will not sand that down smooth to make anyone comfortable. I am kind about it, but I am clear. I keep my clarity now. I earned it. So if you are out there tonight, and you are the one in your family who can hear the wrong note, the one they've decided is too suspicious, too negative, too much, maybe even not quite well, let me tell you what 30 years of listening taught me. A true note is true whether or not anyone else in the room can hear it yet. Your ear is not broken because you are the only one using it. The people who need you to doubt your own hearing are almost always the ones who cannot afford for you to be right. So trust your ear. You do not have to make them hear it. You do not have to set yourself on fire proving what they have chosen not to know. Step back, keep your own clear hearing, and protect your peace, because the wrong note does not need you to expose it. A false chord cannot resolve. It can only get louder on its own, until the day it finally breaks in front of everyone. And on that day, the only question that will matter is whether you spent the years before it trusting the sound of your own true ear, or letting them convince you that you were the thing out of tune. You were never out of tune. You were only ever the first one to hear.